The following stories are people's encounters they have had with the paranormal phenomenon known as shadow people. The next time you see shadows moving in your darkened hallways or bedrooms, it may not be a trick of the light. Someone or something may be watching you. Number 1. It was a few days after New Year's Eve, January of 2009. I was moving to Manhattan later in the week and had stopped by my lifelong friend's house to spend time together before the move. I sat at her dining room table while she finished washing the dishes in the kitchen just to my left. We were chatting away about memories together, the impending move, typical conversation. While she was speaking, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision to the right. I turned my head to look straight down the hallway into the master bedroom. I froze in disbelief of what I saw. A dark, shadowy figure was walking through her bedroom in a straight path. It was the shape of a human, however, much greater in scale. It appeared to be 7 feet tall. The movement of its gait was fluid and slow motion. As it strode past the doorway, the form walked in the manner of a person, with long arms swaying to each step. The figure was instantly discernible as inhuman, as its movements were too slow, and its form too monstrous in size. Upon noticing the entity's presence, it suddenly stopped, slowly turned its head, and stared at me for a few seconds. These moments were the longest of my life. The figure's large, hollow red eyes held a hypnotizing stare with mine. It appeared to be completely stunned that we had encountered each other. As we held each other's gaze, I could feel that it had noticed me, and I was horrified. The figure then slowly turned its head, again in slow motion, and continued its eerie stride into the bedroom wall, and just out of my vision. The way it moved, and its disregard for space, time, or matter, gave me the sense it was from a different dimension, just passing through. It wasn't from here, and by here, I mean this world as we know it. That's the only way I can describe it. By the time the experience had ended, 5 to 7 seconds must have passed. I hadn't heard a word my friend was saying. She must have asked a question, and in my bewilderment, I hadn't responded. She looked up at me and said verbatim, "Are you okay? You look like you've just seen a ghost." I instantly realized that my eyes were wild. Every hair on my body was standing on end, and the blood had left my face. Still in disbelief, I sputtered out a few nonsensical words. How could I tell her what I just saw in her home? How could I describe what was walking through her bedroom, through her wall, towards the nursery where her 2-year-old daughter lay sleeping? I tried to hide my horror as to not scare her, and conversationally brushed it off. I left shortly after and drove home, terrified. The entire ride home I was consumed with the experience and began to fear that death was coming for me. I drove with extreme caution, as I worried that perhaps it was my time to die. This fear stayed in my mind for weeks. I am not a religious person. I am a very practical person who believes there is a scientific answer to almost anything. But that evening is unexplainable, and I've kept it to myself for years. I think about it still, and I live in fear of ever seeing it again. Number 2. I have had many experiences with these things. Never pleasant. It started when I was a baby, actually one of my first memories. They persisted in waking me up in the middle of the night and scaring the crap out of me for the duration of my childhood. Once I was older, it became more of an annoyance, and I just started to ignore them. For the longest time, I thought I was the only one who experienced it, until doing research and realizing that this is a very common global-wide phenomenon. The worst of them by far is the Hat Man. Compared to the hooded or other types of shadows that simply spy on you, then when noticed hide or disappear, the Hat Man actually seems to want to be seen. The first time I saw him, I was about 10 years old and had just laid down to go to bed. I used to always sleep with my window next to my bed wide open, so I could lay there and gaze at the stars and the moon. This night I was just glancing at the moon when I saw the shape of a man with a hat walk by my window. I figured it was maybe a shadow of a neighbor or something, so I wasn't too alarmed. Then it walked by again, this time in the opposite direction, and I got a good look at it. It was about a foot outside my window, had a hat, and an old-looking face with a goatee. I could make out what looked like a sort of long coat or a cape. Now I was really freaked out. Someone was on the outside of my house. I sat up in bed, trying to think of what to do, when it walked by a third time, this time stopping halfway past my window, and he looked right at me, smiling the most hideously evil smile I have ever seen in my life. I was frozen with fear. I finally jumped out of bed and ran to tell my parents. They could see how scared I was, and my dad grabbed a bat and went out to check. No one was there. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. After that, I had to always sleep with my blinds shut. On 2 occasions I heard tapping at my window, but I was too scared to check. There weren't any tree branches nearby. I've seen the Hat Man several times since then, at various places, and once even with a friend who saw the exact same thing. Number 3. When I was 18, I had to have brain surgery to remove a tumor. After the surgery, I couldn't take the meds because they made me sick. This went on for about a week and a half before I was rushed back to the hospital. In my near-death state, I saw these things in my room. Unable to move from my bed because of the pain, I could do nothing but watch as they walked around, got in my face, and seemed to be screaming at me, although they made no sound. This continued for a year afterwards. They seemed to follow me around from place to place. I could only make them out in a darkened room because they appeared blacker than the darkness of the room. The outline of these things terrified me, and it seemed as if they knew that. I can recall 7 of them sitting or standing at the end of my bed, some even walking around my room as if they were waiting for something. If anyone else could give me more information about this phenomenon, I would like to know more. I'm 24 now. I don't see them anymore, but I have to have surgery again in 7 years. I felt as if these things were waiting for me to die and to drag my soul who knows where. They never seemed like they were any good, and that scares the hell out of me. Number 4. When I was 12 years old, I had a strange experience. One night I was awakened by the feeling that someone was watching me. I looked around my room and saw no one. although I had a strange feeling that someone had sat on the edge of my bed. I laid back down and shut my eyes, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was still someone there. I sat up and looked around again. When I looked in the mirror, I saw something I had not expected. There was a man sitting on the edge of my bed. He had a trench coat and a hat, but I couldn't make out any of the other features. He was a shadow. One thing, however, did stand out. He had glowing red eyes. But when I looked on the bed, there was no one there. I looked back at the mirror, and he was gone. I saw him several times after that in the mirror, but never actually in the room. After that, I took the mirror out, and have never had another mirror in my room since. I didn't see him again, and didn't really think about it for 2 years, until a good friend and I started to talk about ghosts. I decided to bring up my shadow man. I described him and what had happened, but I decided to leave out the red eyes. The look he had on his face made me feel like he thought I was crazy. But when I finished my story, the first words out of his mouth were, "Did he have red eyes?" All I could do was nod. He told me of his stories, and the man I saw seemed to be the same man he saw. Within 5 years, I had seen the man with red eyes only a couple of times, and around that time, I was no longer afraid of him. He usually just sat and watched me. Shortly after my daughter was born, I had let her stay in bed with me one night when I was awoken again with the feeling that someone was in the room. I looked at the foot of my bed, and I saw a different shadow man. When I looked at him, he reached over and tried to grab me or my daughter. I covered both of us up, and he disappeared. I've never seen him again. Hello everyone, and thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, remember to click that like button, give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to my channel for future content. I try to put out a video a couple times a week, if not more. Leave me a comment, give me some feedback, let me know what you like, what you don't like, what you want to see more of, what you want to see less of. Again, I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all here next time.